Lesson 1. Keeping sight of your true north. In this lesson, we will discuss 3 aspects of what we mean by true north. We'll talk about the value and importance of having true north for your organization, the impact of what true north can give for your lean transformation, and the visualization of your future state that represents your true north. Let us recall that in our previous session, we talked about the importance of having a lean management system that would help you pursue your lean transformation. The lean management system has 6 components that needs to be put in place by leaders. One of them is what we call true north. In any transformation, more importantly when you pursue lean transformation, it is important to create what we call a guiding light, a compass for all the efforts that your organization needs to put in order to make transformation happen for your people. True north serves as that compass. Think of true north like the North Star, which we call Polaris, which gives you a sense of where things will be going. True north doesn't necessarily mean that you'll get there, but it is a way to keep you in check in order to make sure that all your efforts and energies are geared towards in that direction. True north should have some outcomes of what lean management should mean for the organization and what it means for our future. In essence, when people talk about true north in lean, we always look at it as our source of inspiration and our aspiration. True north should pull us into the future. It is a combination of having logical and both emotions mixed together to drive us towards this lean transformation. It talks about the goals that we should have and the strategy that we should have in order to align both our actions and our values, our purpose towards why we're doing this. True north symbolizes an ideal state or perfection that you wanted your business to go and strive towards to. It is more focused on what you should do, not what we can do. Having a true north for your lean transformation helps you and your people be more motivated towards pursuing these improvements. In lean manufacturing, true north is a fundamental idea which is similar to having all the efforts converge into one direction. The closer you get to true north, the more challenges you will encounter. While we may never arrive at true north, the opportunities that you will come along as you keep on taking the steps will allow you to see what future steps might be possible for you to pursue. It is a persistent practice of all the improvement thinking and mindset that we've talked about in the previous sessions in order for us to be able to achieve the level we wanted to have that represents your true north. In order to make true north clear and understood by many people, we need to have a way by which we can search for the true north of our organization. Typically, you might want to involve other people to bring in what true north represents for the business. It has to be clear and consistent to how the company and your organization will operate itself towards this direction. We need to make sure that the management team and its people are aligned on what true north means for the business. It represents an honest assessment of what we need to do in order to move forward and what kind of DNA is needed for the company to be able to develop. It also requires a very intensive and extensive communication to everybody, not just to the top management, but down the line to even the people who would do the actual improvements. We also need to improve the information flow between people and across functions in order to make sure that everyone is aligned every step of the way. And finally, as lean leaders, we need to walk the talk. We need to be able to demonstrate and show to people what True North means through actions and not words. Some common True Norths that are being adopted by different organizations, such as changeover is 0, lot size of 1, distance of process should be 0, no inventory between processes, instantaneous with no loss of information. There should be no excess information. The line should be perfectly balanced. 0 delay, no waste, 0 defect. These are some examples of what True Norths can be. They are never really achieved and will always have a way to encounter challenges along the way. But nevertheless, these are the True Norths that the organizations will continuously strive to become better and get nearer to their True Norths. In pursuing your True North, it is important to identify how we wish to be able to see the impact of all of this transformation. We need to be able to measure that we are progressing towards our True North and that there is a benefit to the organization and its people. You may recall that in our previous session, we talked about linking or seeing the connection between financial performance and our lean metrics. Lean metrics are those that we try to drive at the process level, at the operations level, and at the same time be able to realize that these lean metrics do have an impact to our financial performance. In lean, we normally talk about various concepts and techniques such as waste, non-value activities, value stream mapping, mistake proofing, quick changeover, Kanban, visual management, line balancing. These are common lean approaches that we use in order to improve the way we do things. From a business standpoint, we also look at the impact of these lean techniques when we apply them. What's the return on investment, return on sales, net profit, revenue growth, asset growth, improving operating income. There has to be a way to see the connection between all of these lean techniques applied in our processes to the return to the business performance. One common way that's being used to measure performance is what we call return on invested capital. Return on invested capital is a simple accounting measure that gives a clue on how efficient companies are running or operating. It is a way for you to be able to see whether you're actually creating value rather than destroying value in your organization. When looking at this return on investment, we can imagine it to be like a tree where you can see the breakdown of how we create value from a financial standpoint of the business. ROIC is composed of the net operating margin and the capital that you put in to be able to generate that margin out of your operations. And the net operating margin is actually driven by both revenue and cost of your operations, while invested capital is the amount you put in both fixed and working capital. Revenue, on the other hand, is composed of the price that you put in and the volume that you generate from your operations. Price is a product of the cost that you incur and, of course, the value that you are able to get when you sell or be able to provide your product or services to your customers. Volume, on the other hand, is connected to the capacity and the quality of your processes. Process capacity, on the other hand, can be established by looking at the available working hours that you have, which is a function of the resources or the people or equipment that you need or have in order to produce that capacity. The hours needed per item that you produced, whether by machine or person, can be established in terms of determining the actual time used, including time wasted prior to the actual operation. Cost is defined as the amount of money you spend on creating and delivering the output of your process. This might be in the form of a variable cost, which is cost for every unit of output you create, or a fixed cost that you have to pay regardless of whether there is an output or not. Variable costs can be in the form of manufacturing, logistics, storage, or any other costs that will be driven by the labor, the quality, the material, the machine hours, and even your utilities. The fixed cost component of your cost consists of other costs that is necessary but not necessarily a factor of the volume you make. This can be in the form of indirect labor or even direct labor, but fixed over a period of time. It will also involve overhead, some depreciation, some other support services, or even supplies. Lastly, in order to be able to define your return on investment, you talk about the invested capital, which is composed of the working capital, the funds you need to run the operations, and the fixed capital. Working capital can be in the form of advances, receivables, or inventory in the function of raw materials, work in process, and even finished goods. Fixed costs, on the other hand, are in terms of the facilities you set up. They can be in the form of a plant, a property, or equipment. When we put all of these components of cost and revenue, we now come up with what we call an ROIC tree. The value of having an ROIC tree is that you'd be able to connect the impact of your lean performance metrics to the overall financial performance of your organization. Having a clear understanding of the connection between process performance from lean and financial performance allows you to gauge the benefit of your transformation and be able to value the impact to the business. The last aspect of lesson 1 is about visualizing your true north. When we visualize our true north, we are in a way trying to understand what would our process be in the future? How would it look like? In Lean, we normally apply what we call value stream maps when we try to visualize our processes. There are 3 types of value stream maps. The first one is the current state, which represents what's happening now. An ideal state, which is often equated to what we call the true north or the North Star. And the future state, which is an interim process towards getting to your ideal state. Normally, when we try to define our future state, it's important to start with defining the current state, which you've done in our previous lessons. We need to define the ideal state, which represents your true north, and then define the future state that you are going to work on and realize. As you would recall, a current state map helps us understand what is the current situation of your processes. In your current state map, we would be able to reflect not only what's happening, but the many opportunities that is present in your current process that you would now attempt to pursue. There are many obstacles that you might also identify in your current state map that would also allow you to drive improvements by targeting each of these obstacles. An ideal state is defining the vision of your true north. It is where you feel the business is going to be in its ideal form. The ideal state is a manifestation and an articulation of the true north of the business. In this example, you would notice that we're able to define an ideal state of our process where it shows the best way to be able to produce our products in the shortest time possible given the best configuration without worrying about our current condition. The ideal state represents the ideal performance that our business should be able to make in order to realize our vision. In order to be clear on what we mean by an ideal process, we will attempt to define what would be important when we consider defining our ideal state. Effectively, when we talk about an ideal state and any other future state that we wanted to define, we need to keep in mind that lean really is about creating the flow in our processes. Applying this flow perspective means that we keep in mind what lean is trying to accomplish. By flow, we mean that work passes through from one process to the other without ever stopping. Typically, most processes in our current state represents a lot of blockages or obstacles where our products remain in between processes for whatever reason. The attempt to do an ideal state is to make the entire process flow continuously. In order to design an ideal state with a perfect flow, we need to consider four things. First, we talk about the use of 5S or visual management, the concept of pull, which is take one and then make one, work cells or group technology, meaning to be able to group processes together, and finally, to enable the process to move without blockages. One of the basic concepts being applied when we try to create flow is to apply 5S. Basic 5S is simply trying to clear out things so we can see what hinders our products from moving forward. 5S is a discipline that allows you to see these obstacles and address them later on. The next concept in making flow is to apply the principle of taking one and making one. This means that you don't do more than what is needed or that the next person can do. Your goal is to be able to get a job and finish the job without creating any other excess work in the next process. We avoid doing simultaneous work that only adds up or piles up to the next process. The third idea for making flow is to apply what we call work cells. Work cells is simply the idea of creating or grouping our resources so that they can work together faster. We can have multiple work cells that allows us to have parallel work at the same time, which provides robustness in case of any sudden uncertainties or obstacles that may come along the way. The last concept in making your process flow ideally is to remove blockages. Blockages can be in the form of quality performances that disrupts the flow of your products or time that's spent in preparing to work on your products. When you talk about improving quality or ensuring quality, we can make or do what we call source inspection by preventing bad products going into the process and wasting the resources and time of our people. You can do single minute exchange of die or SMED, a changeover technique that helps us remove these waiting times or setup times that is often consumed before we actually continue to do our work. Using these concepts allows us to address now blockages that can hinder the flow of your products. The third type of value stream map is the future state. The future state allows you to define a more tangible roadmap to pursuing successive improvements that will allow you to focus the efforts of your people. A future state map is defined as an interim process that we wanted to be able to achieve en route to the ideal state that you wanted. It allows us to identify the areas of improvements that we need to pursue in order to reach the midpoint or a midway towards your ideal state. This future state is composed of opportunities that you need to be able to address or pursue in the process of getting to your ideal state. A future state map represents now the plan that you can now have that shows what are the components of your processes, their relationships, and how you can now improve on them in order to achieve a much better performance than your current state. It also identifies the measurable performances in your metrics in order for you to be able to evaluate your improvements. When we try to create and define our future state, we can ask some of these questions. First, how fast should your process now flow? We can apply the concept of takt time and how much resources are needed in order to allow us to move our products at this pace. A concept that can be used in defining the speed or the lead time of your process can be the concept of what we call a WIP cap. The second question would be about how do you make sure that a process can be performed continuously? How do you address now steps in the processes that are not normally continuous in nature? And finally, we talk about defining a possibility of a way to schedule the work so that your processes do not get overwhelmed. These questions can be answered moving forward with some concepts in defining your lean processes. When defining or creating your future state map, we will introduce 4 concepts that will be valuable in articulating what improvements can be done. These concepts will be the WIP cap, meaning WIP capacity, the concept of pull in the form of a supermarket, using FIFO or creating a FIFO lane, and finally introducing what we call a pacemaker to regulate the flow of work. WIP cap or work in process capacity is a form of standardizing the amount of work that is allowed to stay in between processes. A WIP cap limits the volume of work so that your process don't get overwhelmed. WIP cap, or also referred to as critical WIP, is a way to control your work in process so that your processes do not get overwhelmed. The goal is to be able to regulate in order to make sure that any job that goes inside your processes will be done. By regulating your WIP cap or your WIP, you're able to manage now your cycle time and your lead time. WIP cap functions as a support to a pull environment, which means that the process will only require or use up or get more WIP when it is able to do so. A practical and non-manufacturing example of a controlled WIP or WIP cap is how often you would actually experience taking a flight from, say, Cebu to Manila, where if there's traffic in Metro Manila or air traffic in Metro Manila, you would not allow a plane to take off from Cebu and allow it to just circle around in NCR, because that will only allow increase the traffic volume but not necessarily improve the traffic flow. So creating a controlled whip allows the processes to prioritize and handle the volume much better. In principle, when we apply the power of the whip cap, we are inadvertently improving the lead time and the cycle time of your processes. More whip often results to longer lead time. Less whip leads to less lead time. The second concept when we define our future state is to use the concept of pull. The concept of pull and push is simply all about allowing work to be done or to be started when it is needed. A pull process is where the customer or the process that will require or will be doing the job will be the one requesting for the job. A push process is where products or work is pushed to the next process even if the next process is not yet ready or does not yet need that particular product. In principle, the pull system works well together with the whip cap. When the whip of the process is below the whip cap, the process is allowed to pull more work to come in. When the whip cap is achieved, then the pull stops. When we apply these pull systems, we are in a way reducing the amount of work inside our processes, thereby reducing the cycle time and reducing any possibility of waste or excesses that oftentimes happens when whip or when processes push products to the next step. Our goal is to be able to ensure that any component or materials that are allowed to go inside our process are consumed and are processed that will be sufficient enough to meet the demand of the customer. An example of a pull system is what we call a supermarket. A supermarket is a kind of pull system that is being used by lean manufacturing practitioners. It is a way where you create a location that has a pre-standard or predetermined inventory that ensures that supply is present for the downstream process. The goal is not to starve the next process, but ensure that enough supply is available to allow the process to continue to work. These supermarkets are typically located near the supply part that will help the process to see that there's enough input materials that your next process can use. When the customer or the process uses a portion of the supermarket is then replenished, thereby becoming a pull system in itself. Technically speaking, when a supermarket is implemented, what happens is you have this diagram of a multi-shelf symbol that represents a supermarket in the middle. The two processes A and B are interacting that both withdraw the items in the supermarket and A supplying the withdrawn amount from the supermarket. So this cycle of replenishment and withdrawal happens, and the supermarket is a way to also limit the amount of material that you wanted to keep and not go beyond it. Supermarkets can be used in your processes, whether in manufacturing or services, where continuous flow may not be possible and batching is necessary because of the distance or because of some other constraint. With supermarkets, we can protect the other processes from the prior process, which can be very slow or very fast, and that because of this prior process, they can result to the starvation of the downstream processes. Another example of supermarkets would be suppliers that might be too far away or having a hard time shipping the raw materials to your process or to the next process easily. And finally, there might be too much lead time or unreliable chance of actually supplying the raw materials or the products to the next process that would allow you to run continuously. The next concept that you can use when you define your future state is to promote first in, first out, or FIFO. FIFO, or first in, first out, can be influenced or promoted by introducing what we call a FIFO lane. A FIFO lane allows you to ensure that no products or orders are allowed to overtake any other orders in front of them. It is a way to limit the quantity and the order of the quantity that goes into your processes. Some illustrations of a FIFO lane would be a flow rack with return, where the parts or the products are put on a rack and the rack ensures a first in, first out order. Another example would be in a warehouse where you could see forklifts putting in containers or products into a rack from a left side and being pulled out from the right side. These FIFO lane processes ensure the proper sequence of products that would allow you to make the products move continuously and not be left behind. A practical illustration of a FIFO is using the FIFO container system, where you have 3 Kanban squares that limits the amount of containers in your floor. These 3 Kanban squares with containers on them will be serving as your FIFO lane. So when you put a cone in front of a container, that means that is the container that should be pulled out first. When the container is pulled out, then the cone will now be moved to the next container, which will be the next container to be pulled out. Once a container is pulled out, another container is replenished to fill in the empty square. This process shows us how we can now combine many concepts of pull, supermarkets, and a FIFO that allows you to be able to regulate not just the amount of inventory, but what inventory and when to use such inventory. The last concept when you define your future state is looking into the way by which you control the pace of work in your processes. In order to control the pacing of your processes, we introduce the idea of what we call a pacemaker. A pacemaker is where a point in the process where you actually set the pace of your performance. These are often set at the upstream of your processes, and they allow you to protect the downstream processes from any fluctuations. The pacemaker oftentimes is dependent on the requirement being set by your customer, and that the pacemaker will simply allow the process to keep pace with the demands or to the requirements of the customer. An example of a pacemaker would be a kitchen visual system, as you see here, where the KVS or the kitchen system allows the kitchen to prioritize and focus on processing orders that come in, and that whoever is handling the kitchen visual system paces the kitchen so that it doesn't get overwhelmed by orders. Pacemakers can be defined at different locations of your processes. It can be defined at the very end of the downstream process that is directly connected to your customer, or it can be identified at the upstream part of your process, which regulates the flow of products or orders into your processes. Either way, pacemakers are very important because they help you manage the volume of requirements that enters your processes. When applying all of these concepts about defining your true north, we are now able to pursue a higher chance of success when we run our lean transformation. The real secret of success is that leaders should be able to provide and articulate the true north of the organization. The true north of the organization has to be measured in some way or the other. We need to be able to see the impact of our transformation in order to give us a motivation that the organization is moving towards its true north. And finally, visualizing your ideal and future state allows everybody in the organization to see the meaning and the implication of your true north, of what state will be when we reach our true north. Some key messages that I'd like you to keep in mind out of this lesson. True north defines the outcome of your lean management system and where you want your system to take you in the future. The impact of lean can be measured by linking your operational metrics to the final financial metrics of the business. ROIC is a way by which you can visualize the link of your operations to your business performance. And finally, we apply the current state map where we can identify improvements which can be part of the future state map. The future state map allows us to imagine what happens to our processes when we address the opportunities that are present in your current state map.